When 27-year-old Maya Kapoor failed to check in from her carefully planned solo camper trip in 2014, her father knew something terrible had happened to his independent daughter. Search teams scoured miles of wilderness for weeks, but found nothing. No tracks, no discarded gear, no sign of a struggle. It was as if she'd stepped into the trees and simply vanished. Then, 8 years later, a teenager fishing in a shallow cove spotted a flash of yellow beneath the glassy surface, something heavy and waterlogged that didn't belong there. What they hauled up, a sodden yellow sleeping bag, and the thing wrapped inside it, left investigators staring at evidence that simply wouldn't fit the story they thought they knew. Before continuing this amazing story, let us know where are you watching from today. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Let's begin our story. Maya left on a Thursday morning. The air was bright, the sky over the highway washed in early autumn blue. A cool breeze carried the smell of damp leaves as she loaded the last of her gear into the back of her camper. Maya Kapoor was 27. 5'7", lean from years of hiking, with a braid that reached the middle of her back. In the driveway, her father watched her work, sipping coffee that had already gone lukewarm in his hand. The yellow sleeping bag went in last, rolled tight, cinched with 2 straps, a small tag sewn to the edge with her initials stitched in careful thread. She'd had it since college. It had been with her on every trip that mattered. She told her father the plan again, even though he already knew it. 3 nights, solo camping in the Ridgeback wilderness. She'd drive up to the trailhead, hike the western loop, and return by Sunday night. She promised to send a check-in message every 48 hours from her satellite tracker. He nodded, but his eyes followed her hands as she tightened the straps on the pack. Little movements stuck in his memory. The way she leaned her weight into the pull, the soft click of the buckle. Years later, those same movements would replay in his mind in sharper detail than the rest of that morning. The camper door slammed. The sound echoed down the quiet street. She leaned out the driver's side, smiled, and held up 2 fingers in a peace sign, the same way she always did when leaving on a trip. He lifted his coffee in reply. They didn't hug. It wasn't that kind of goodbye. The taillights flared. The camper turned the corner, shrinking to a blur behind the last row of houses. In the driveway, Ravi Kapoor stood with his mug cooling in his hands, telling himself it was only 3 days. Across the street, a neighbor's dog barked twice. The sound faded into the steady hum of morning traffic until all that was left was the soft tick of cooling metal from where the camper had been. Later, he would remember how quiet the street felt, like the space between 2 breaths, and how that yellow sleeping bag, bright, ordinary, harmless, was the last thing he ever saw her carry. What none of them knew was that it would take 8 years for it to surface again, and when it did, it wouldn't be her inside. The last photo of Maya was taken at a gas station 2 hours north of home. She's standing beside the camper, 1 boot on the running board, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. Her phone rests in her left hand. In her right, the rolled yellow sleeping bag, like she'd just taken it out to rearrange the gear. The midday sun washes her in a pale glare, softening the sharp edges of the picture. The timestamp reads 11:42 a.m., September 18th, 2014. The receipt for her gas fill-up matches it exactly. Inside the store, a camera caught her paying for a bottle of water and a packet of almonds. She smiled at the cashier. No sign of stress, no hint of what was coming. The cashier remembered her later, not for what she bought, but for what she said. She'd asked if there was anywhere nearby to get a paper map of the Ridgeback trails. Her GPS wasn't loading the satellite overlay. The cashier pointed her toward a rack by the front door. She picked up a folded topographic map, slid it between her arm and the sleeping bag, and left. 2 hours after that photo, her satellite tracker pinged from the Ridgeback Trailhead parking lot. That was the first check-in. The second check-in never came. Ravi Kapoor didn't see the gas station photo until a week later. By then, her camper had been found locked and empty. The keys were still in the ignition. He studied that picture for hours. His finger traced the strap on the sleeping bag over and over until the fabric in the photo felt more real than the one sitting in the garage. Detectives examined the timestamp, the receipt, the footage. They spoke to every customer in the store that day. No one had followed her out. No one had noticed anything strange. Just a young woman on her way into the wilderness, carrying a sleeping bag that would, for some reason, spend 8 years underwater. The gas station camera caught her driving away. It did not catch what followed her. The Ridgeback Trailhead sits at the end of a narrow gravel road, forest on both sides, no houses, no cell service. Maya's camper arrived there at 2:17 p.m., according to the trailhead camera. It was parked in the far corner, angled toward the exit. She opened the side door, leaned in, and pulled out her pack. Yellow sleeping bag strapped tight on top. Hiking poles tucked into the side mesh. The ranger who later reviewed the footage noticed how she paused before closing the door. One hand on the frame, looking toward the start of the trail, like she was gauging the weather or listening for something in the trees. Then she shouldered the pack, stepped onto the trail. The camera caught her for exactly 9 seconds before she disappeared into the tree line. That was the last confirmed sighting. When search teams arrived 3 days later, the camper was still there, keys in the ignition. Driver's seat pushed back, as if she'd been sitting in it with the door open. On the passenger seat, the folded map from the gas station. Trails marked in faint pencil. Small circles drawn around 2 backcountry campsites. In the back, her cooking gear and extra clothes were stacked neatly, but the pack and the yellow sleeping bag were gone. Ravi Kapoor stood inside the camper while deputies dusted for prints. He reached up, touched the sleeping shelf above the driver's cab. Maya used to stash her bag there on long trips. The space was empty, too empty. Detectives swept the surrounding parking lot for tire marks. They found 2 sets, Maya's and one other set they couldn't match. A local hiker told them a dark SUV had been parked near the trailhead that weekend. No plate number, no description of the driver, just an SUV, and a yellow sleeping bag no one would see again until it rose out of the water almost a decade later. By the time the alarm went up, she was already 48 hours overdue. The ranger station got the call from Ravi Kapoor at 8:12 a.m. Monday morning. Within 2 hours, 4 deputies and a pair of volunteer searchers were at the Ridgeback Trailhead. They started with the loop she'd planned, a 17-mile circuit through dense pine and cedar with 2 backcountry campsites marked on her map. The first campsite was empty, fire pit cold, ground undisturbed except for 1 set of boot prints leading in, then out again. The size matched hers. At the second site, they found a scrap of waxed paper from an energy bar. Same brand she'd bought at the gas station. No tent, no pack, no yellow sleeping bag. Searchers spread out in teams of 3. One man called out her name every 10 steps. Another marked trees with bright orange tape. Ravi walked with a deputy along the ridgeline. He scanned the ground automatically, eyes catching on any flash of color. Once his heart kicked. A flicker of yellow in the underbrush. But it was just a clump of aspen leaves, damp from the morning rain. By sunset, they'd covered 12 miles of trail. The helicopter circled twice before turning back toward the ranger station. Night settled over the ridgeback. Temperature dropped fast. Mist curled between the trees. At the trailhead, the camper sat exactly as they'd found it. Inside, Ravi sat in the driver's seat, both hands on the steering wheel, staring out at the dark road. Somewhere in those woods was his daughter, and somewhere with her was that yellow sleeping bag, rolled tight, cinched with straps, initials stitched in the fabric. The next morning, a deputy knocked on the camper window. They'd found something. It wasn't her. It was wedged between 2 river stones. half buried in silt, the label peeling, the cap missing. A volunteer found it just after 9 a.m. on the second day of searching. He'd been walking the edge of Cedar Run, a fast-moving stream that cuts diagonally through the Ridgeback Loop. The bottle was the same brand Maya bought at the gas station. Still faintly smelled of plastic and the sharp tang of river water. Deputies photographed it in place. Gloved hands lifted it free, turned it over in the sun, checked for teeth marks, scratches, anything that might suggest it had been carried by an animal. Nothing. The base was clean except for a faint MK in black permanent marker, her habit for anything she took on trips. Robbie was standing 10 feet away when they told him. He didn't say anything at first, just reached out, fingertips brushing the damp plastic like it might still be warm from her hand. The riverbank here was steep. Water surged cold and fast, churning over moss-dark stones. A misplaced step could drop someone waist-deep in seconds. Searchers worked upstream, eyes sweeping for more debris. Food wrappers, scraps of fabric, the glint of a metal cup. They found nothing. Downstream, the river bent hard to the east and disappeared into a gully too narrow for the search teams to walk. They'd need ropes to check further. That would take another day. Detectives logged the bottle as likely hers. They didn't log it as evidence of an accident. Not yet. That afternoon, they widened the search grid. A canine unit brought in from the county picked up a scent near the second campsite, then lost it halfway to the river. The handler thought it might mean she'd left the trail there, or been carried. Robbie spent the evening pacing between the camper and the ranger's truck. Each time he passed the open evidence case, his eyes locked on that bottle, as if staring hard enough might pull the rest of her gear out of the woods. And in his mind, behind every image of the bottle, was the yellow sleeping bag, rolled, strapped, waiting somewhere. At sunset, the lead detective took him aside. A hiker, 2 valleys over, had reported something strange the day after Maya vanished. It wasn't a body. It was something else, something bright. The hiker's name was Dale Benton, 59, retired electrician, the kind of man who logged every backcountry mile in a spiral-bound notebook. He'd been on the eastern slope the morning after Maya vanished. Fog still low enough to beat on his beard. Air sharp with that mineral smell rivers give off before sunrise. Around mile 3, he'd stopped to adjust his pack straps. That's when he saw it, a bright flash through the pines, down in a narrow drainage. Looked yellow, he told deputies, not leaf yellow, fabric yellow. Detectives had him walk them to the spot. It took 2 hours along switchback trails slick with pine needles. The drainage was a steep cut in the hillside, shaded and damp. At the bottom, they found the source of the color. A tarp. Not a sleeping bag, a heavy-duty builder's tarp, crumpled and stiff with dried mud. The yellow was faded, almost ochre, and torn along one edge. Dale swore it hadn't been there the week before. He even flipped through his notebook for proof, a neat entry for that same trail, noting no obstructions, clean runoff. The tarp looked like it had been dragged. Snags along one side matched the spacing of small saplings on the slope above. Deputies lifted it carefully, expecting, not quite knowing, what they'd see underneath. But there was nothing, just damp soil, a few pale beetles scurrying from the light. Still, they bagged it. Fabric can hold scent for months, sometimes years. The K9 unit gave it a brief sniff, then turned away. No alert. Robbie stood at the top of the drainage, hands in the pockets of his jacket. The way the tarp caught the light in places made it hard not to imagine the sleeping bag. His sleeping bag, the one she'd used on every trip since she was 17. For a moment, he let himself picture it, yellow canvas breaking the surface of the lake, water sliding off in sheets, straps still buckled. But the tarp went into storage at the county evidence locker, marked Item 14. And just like that, Dale Benton's bright flash became another dead end. That night, Robbie unfolded her last topo map on the camper's table. He traced the trail from the parking lot to where the tarp was found. His fingers stopped halfway between the 2 points, a blank stretch of terrain with no official campsites. In that blank space, something caught the search team's attention. Not color, sound. It was mid-afternoon when the sound first carried up the ridge. A dull, rhythmic thump, spaced just enough to make the deputies pause mid-step. They were moving through what the topo map called Sector C, a tangle of wind-thrown pine, deadfall stacked like pickup sticks, and gullies that swallowed you in shadow even at noon. The lead searcher raised a hand. Everyone froze. The thump came again. 3 beats this time, then silence. One of the volunteers cupped a hand around his ear. "You hear that?" They waited. No wind, no birds, the kind of stillness that settles after a predator moves through, or before a storm breaks. Then it came again, this time louder, followed by a hollow splash, like a log dropping into water. They moved toward it. Not fast. Too many hidden holes. Too many ways to turn an ankle here. At the bottom of the gully, they found the source. A stump, half submerged in a shallow pool. Every few minutes, water from a narrow feeder stream would spill over, push the stump just enough to make it pivot, then drop back into place with that hollow knock. It was nothing, just wood and water doing what they'd done for years, but the sound had carried far enough to make them realize something else. This pool fed into a wider channel, and that channel bent west toward the part of Ridgeback no one had searched yet. One of the deputies took a knee, dipped his fingers into the current, cold enough to make him hiss. He straightened and looked at the others. "If she went in upstream..." Nobody finished the sentence. They didn't have to. They marked the location with GPS and orange tape, then called it in. The commander at base camp agreed. They'd expand west in the morning. That night, Ravi sat alone in the camper. The map lay open on the table, a mug of untouched coffee cooling beside it. His thumb traced the blue line of that channel. He thought of her habits on trips. She always camped near water if she could, always zipped the sleeping bag all the way up to her chin, always kept it rolled tight when she wasn't in it, straps crossed, initials facing up. He imagined it now, caught on some submerged branch, fabric darkened by silt, but still yellow under the grime. When he closed his eyes, the sound from the gully replayed in his head. Knock, 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 splash. The next morning, the search team started at dawn. 2 deputies took the northern bank of the channel, 2 took the south. The rest moved in a staggered sweep through the brush, calling her name every 30 steps. An hour in, one of the southern bank deputies spotted something tangled in a root system, a strip of nylon. It was pale from sun and water, maybe 2 inches wide. Could have been anything. Tent fly, rain jacket, backpack strap. They eased it free. The cut was clean, like from a blade. No fray, no tear. They bagged it and logged the coordinates. Then they kept moving. By midday, the teams had covered nearly 3 miles of shoreline without another find. But the channel widened here, its banks dropping steep into darker, deeper water. A heron rose from the shallows as they approached, its wings silent, but its shadow sliding over the surface. Ravi walked with the northern team now, his eyes scanning both bank and water. Every so often, something bright would flash beneath the surface. Sun glancing off a rock or a can left by another camper. Each time his pulse jumped before settling back. Mid-afternoon, a shout came from downstream, the kind of shout that pulled every head around. The southern bank team had found something lodged under a fallen tree, half in, half out of the water. It wasn't the sleeping bag. Not yet, but it was hers. A boot. The left one, laces still tied, tread packed with fine gray silt. Ravi crouched beside the deputy holding it. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the wet leather, then pulled back. "She always double-knotted," he said quietly. The find shifted the tone of the search. Now the chatter between team members dropped to near nothing. Every movement was deliberate. Every turn in the channel felt heavier. They kept going until the light began to fade. The channel widened further here, opening into a small basin ringed by reeds. Something about the way the water moved caught the lead searcher's eye. A slow, steady pull toward one corner, as if the lake itself were breathing. They marked the spot for divers. Tomorrow, they'd see what lay beneath. Ravi stayed at the water's edge until they made him leave. As he walked back to the truck, the boot was all he could see in his mind. And beside it, in the dark water, something larger, something yellow. Morning came gray and cold. The kind of cold that pressed its way under collars and cuffs, that carried the metallic smell of wet stone. At the basin's edge, the dive team unloaded their gear. 2 men, 1 woman, all in black neoprene that made them look more like shapes than people. They worked without chatter. One checked air tanks, another laid out lines and reels. The third knelt in the mud, running a hand along the lake's surface like she was greeting it. Ravi stood back with the deputies. The boot sat on the tailgate of the truck, tagged and bagged. He kept glancing at it, not staring, just enough to remind himself why they were here. The reeds whispered in the wind. Somewhere across the basin, a single loon called once, then fell silent. The lead diver stepped forward. Mask on, regulator in. A nod to the tender, then she slipped into the water, smooth as if she'd been pulled. The lake swallowed her sound. Bubbles broke the surface in slow clusters. The reel line unspooled, bright orange against the dark water, and fed steadily from the tender's hands. 10 minutes. 15. The deputies scanned the water's surface, waiting for the signal. 1 hard tug if she found something, 2 if she was moving to a new sector. At minute 17, the line went slack. Then 1 sharp pull. Everyone leaned forward. Bubbles surged up near the reeds. The diver broke the surface, mask already lifted, voice low but urgent. Got an object. Fabric. Tangled. She rolled onto her back, handed up a mesh evidence bag dripping lake water. Inside was a crumpled bundle the color of sun-bleached straw. Nylon. Thin. No zippers. Not the sleeping bag. It was a rainfly from a tent. The grommets along one side had rusted almost to dust. Ravi stepped closer. For a split second, before the diver's hand turned it, he'd seen yellow. His chest had tightened. Now he exhaled and stepped back. They logged the find, bagged it, sent the diver down again. The second diver entered from the opposite bank, moving along the channel mouth. He carried a camera rig that fed live images to a monitor on shore. On the screen, the water below was dark green, flecked with silt. Branches like pale arms reached from the silt bed. At one point, a shape appeared in the corner, rounded, soft-edged, impossible to size. The tender froze the frame, but a swirl of silt erased it before anyone could call it a lead. 2 more hours, 3 more objects, none of them hers. A rusted cookpot, a strip of canvas, half of a fishing rod. By midday, the divers surfaced together. They'd cleared the entire southern half of the basin. The northern half lay ahead, the side where the current pooled, slow and deliberate, under the overhang of leaning cedars. While the divers rested, Ravi walked the northern bank. Every few feet, he crouched, picked up a stick, tossed it into the water. He watched each one drift toward the same corner. In his head, he pictured her sleeping bag again. Strapped, rolled, initials up, moving under that same pull. The lead diver joined him after lunch. "You see where that line of foam builds?" she asked, pointing with her chin. He nodded. "That's your collection point. Anything loose in this lake ends up there eventually. If she's in here, that's where she'll be." They re-entered at 1400 hours. One diver ran the perimeter, keeping a steady light along the silt wall. The other cut diagonally toward the foam line. The camera feed came up grainy. More debris here, more weeds drifting in the current. Then, at 45 minutes, the perimeter diver's light passed over something that didn't move with the weeds. A curve. Bright. The camera lingered. Silt drifted across, then cleared just enough. It was fabric. Yellow. The image was too tight to tell shape, but it was rounded, strapped. The diver's gloved hand entered the frame, brushing the silt away in slow arcs. And that's when the feed cut to static. The monitor flickered once, then again, and then nothing. Just a pale field of static, the kind that hums faintly if you lean close. The tender cursed under his breath, fingers already working the cables. "Signal loss," he called to the lead deputy. "Camera's still powered, but feed's dead." Ravi stepped up to the shoreline, scanning for any ripple, any burst of bubbles. Nothing moved out there except the foam line, folding over itself in slow loops. 2 minutes, 3. The northern bank was quiet. Even the loon from the morning had gone still. The tender switched to a backup screen. Black, no signal. Then yanked the headset mic to his mouth. "Surface, surface." A hiss of static answered. 4 minutes. The second diver's bubbles appeared first, 20 yards east of the foam line. He pulled his regulator, shook his head. "Line's still taut. He's got contact down there," which meant the other diver hadn't surfaced and hadn't lost his tether. 5 minutes. The tender locked eyes with the deputy. "Going to emergency protocol?" A nod. The second diver went under again, finning hard in the direction of the foam line. His air trail cut straight, no hesitation. Ravi kept his gaze fixed on the spot where the bubbles had last been. His fingers dug into the canvas strap of his own field bag, knuckles whitening. 7 minutes. Movement broke the surface. A burst of bubbles, then 2 heads. The missing diver came up gasping, regulator half out, clutching something to his chest. He hauled it into the air, not high, just enough to break the waterline. Yellow. Darker from the water, but unmistakable. The tender reached for it, hands closing on sodden fabric. It was heavy. Water streamed from the folds, darkening the dirt at their feet. Ravi stepped closer. He knew that canvas weave, the double seam along the side, the buckle strap with the worn edge where she'd once caught it in a door. She'd folded it the same way every time, rolling from the foot up, tucking the pillow inside so it wouldn't flatten. His father's hands had shown her. Now his hands twitched, wanting to undo the straps, to see if the pillow was still there. But the deputy's voice cut through. "Bag it! Bag it now!" Gloved hands slid the bundle into a plastic sleeve, sealing it against the air. The divers climbed out, shivering despite the suits. "What else?" the deputy asked. The first diver shook his head. It was wedged between 2 logs, like it had been there a while. No other objects in reach. Bottom soft there. You sink if you stay too long. The tender stowed the evidence in a crate, locking it before loading it into the truck bed. Ravi's eyes stayed on it until the tailgate shut. It looked smaller now, sealed and dripping. But in his mind, it still lay across the camper's bench seat, bright against the dark upholstery. The deputies began packing up the site. Coiled lines, empty tanks, folded tarps. The air had shifted. Not relief, not yet, but a tightening. They'd found something real. By the time the trucks pulled away, the sun had dropped low enough to paint the lake in bronze. The foam line still moved, looping slow under the cedars. Ravi stayed until the last echo of the engines faded. Only then did he walk to the far edge of the northern bank, crouch, and let his fingers brush the water. Cold, still, hiding the rest of its story. The evidence lab smelled faintly of isopropyl. Bright light spilled from the ceiling in cold, white rectangles. The yellow sleeping bag lay in the center of a stainless steel table, sealed in its thick plastic sheath. Condensation had gathered along the inside. Droplets rolled slowly down, catching the light. The tech stood back for a moment, gloved hands still. This wasn't a quick job. Every layer mattered. Every movement could erase something invisible. Ravi stood behind the glass partition, headphones feeding him the faint buzz of the lab's air system. He'd been in rooms like this before, just never with something that belonged to her. The senior tech, Morgan, broke the seal with surgical scissors. Not one long cut. Small, deliberate snips, pausing each time to steady the material. As the opening widened, the smell came first. Not rot, not fuel, a damp, earthy scent like wet cedar mixed with lake silt. Morgan slid the bag onto the table. The outer surface was darker than he remembered. Water had seeped deep into the fibers, leaving a faint tide line halfway up the roll. The strap buckle clinked against the table's edge. It was still closed. Morgan paused, eyes moving between the buckle and the intake log. Document the assistant snapped photos, top, side, close-up of the strap, close-up of the frayed edge where it had once caught in a door. Ravi's fingertips brushed the glass. He'd seen that fray 100 times in camp, seen her pinch it between her fingers and say she'd fix it next trip. Morgan unclipped the buckle. The sound was sharper than Ravi expected. She unrolled the bag slowly, each layer separating with a faint, sticky pull. Tiny beads of water clung to the fabric, trembling as they caught the light. Inside, the pillow was still there, flattened, damp, the cotton cover stained darker in irregular shapes. Morgan didn't touch it yet. She studied the seams first, running a small flashlight along every line, looking for cuts, burns, or signs of stress. Halfway down, her light stopped. A faint, linear tear, no longer than a thumbnail. The fibers at the edge were feathered, not clean cut. She took another series of photos, then reached for a swab. The motion was precise. Twist, seal, label. The pillow came out next. As she lifted it, something shifted inside the bag. A faint metallic sound, muffled by the damp fabric. Morgan froze. Her assistant looked up. Ravi's breath caught. Morgan reached into the foot of the bag, fingers probing carefully. Then she drew her hand back, holding a small object in her palm. It was a zipper pull. Black enamel chipped at the edges. The cord was still looped through it, frayed at one end as if it had been torn free. Morgan held it to the camera, turning it under the light. The assistant bagged it separately, labeling it Item 14B. Ravi leaned closer to the glass. He didn't recognize the zipper pull. It wasn't from the sleeping bag. Morgan finished unrolling the bag entirely, flattening it so the inner lining was exposed. She scanned for stains, debris, insect casings, anything that could anchor the timeline. Near the head end, she found a smear of something pale, barely visible against the fabric. It could have been silt. It could have been something else entirely. Another swab, another sealed bag. The clock in the lab ticked over to 4:12 p.m. Morgan straightened, peeling off her gloves. "Forensics will run everything," she said to the deputy on the other side of the glass. "But the zipper pull, that's not standard issue on camping gear. Could be clothing, could be a bag." Ravi's eyes stayed on the yellow fabric, now limp and open on the table. It looked smaller somehow, less like the thing that had once wrapped her in warmth, more like an empty outline. The deputy turned to him. "Next step is cross-referencing that zipper with missing persons and gear databases. Might give us a manufacturer, a year, something to go on." Ravi nodded, but his mind was already somewhere else. He was replaying the metallic sound, the way it had been muffled inside the bag. If that zipper pull had been there all these years, what else was still lying at the bottom of that lake? The zipper pull was small, but it had weight. Not physical weight, informational weight. Morgan sent it to the gear database analysts the same afternoon it came out of the sleeping bag. By morning, they had something. A probable match. YKK pull, black enamel, used on a limited run of mid-range waterproof jackets between 2012 and 2015. Brand, North Point Outdoor. It wasn't a camping brand you saw everywhere. Small distribution. Sold mainly online and in a handful of regional outfitters. That made the search narrower and strangely promising. The model with that exact pull had been produced for 2 seasons only, and in its second year, a small outdoor forum had reviewed it. The techs pulled the archived page. The post was dated March 2014. Username, Granite Path. The review was long, methodical. Mentions of testing the jacket on solo trips and pushing further into remote areas this year. One photo in the post showed the jacket draped over a boulder. Background, pine forest, rocky stream bed. Nothing you could pin to a specific location, except for the faint outline of a ridge, blurred in the top left corner. Ravi leaned over the printout, tapping the ridge with one finger. She used to sketch that, said it looked like a sleeping dog. The detectives ordered a full scrape of Granite Path's posts. Most were about gear, trip reports, weather data, nothing that directly tied to Maya. But one post stopped everyone cold. It was from April 21st, 2014, 4 days after Maya's last confirmed sighting. The username had posted in a thread about spring flooding in the high country. Lost some gear in a washout, it read. Yellow bag, among other things. Still got the jacket, though. Yellow bag. The phrase sat heavy on the page. Detective Soto, who'd been quiet most of the meeting, finally spoke. We tracked this account. The forum server was long defunct, but the data had been mirrored. The IP traces to a university server in Oregon. Soto and the tech team dug deeper. The account was linked to a student network login. Name, Eric Dalton. Dalton had graduated in 2015 with a degree in forestry. No criminal record. No missing person reports on him. They pulled his class schedule for the spring of 2014. During the week Maya disappeared, he'd been registered for 2 classes with no attendance records. On paper, it was nothing. But in the hall, Soto told Ravi quietly, forestry students. They go places most people don't. They know how to move through terrain. They found Dalton's last known address, a cabin property outside Eugene, leased until 2017. He hadn't renewed. The forwarding address was a P.O. box in Montana. Soto and a second detective drove out to the cabin site. The structure was empty. Inside, just dust, stacked paint cans, and a map tacked to the wall. The map was of the Cascades. In the margin, a series of faint pencil marks. Dates, trail names, small symbols. One symbol, a square with a dot in the center, repeated 3 times. The detectives didn't recognize it, but Ravi did. It was the way Maya marked base camps on her personal maps. Soto took photos, bagged the map. Back at the office, the marks lined up with 3 trailheads, 2 known, 1 unofficial. They put in a request for Dalton's financial history. While they waited, Soto had the tech team check all known purchases of the North Point jacket model in the state in early 2014. Dalton's name wasn't there, but his roommate's was. The theory tightened. Roommate buys jacket. Dalton uses it. Jacket pull ends up inside Maya's sleeping bag. By the 3rd day, financial records came back. Dalton's last major purchase before Maya's disappearance, a gas can, rope, and a box of contractor-grade trash bags from a hardware store in Bend. When confronted with the receipt over the phone, Dalton didn't hang up. He laughed once, short and dry. Then he said, "You're wasting your time." The call ended. The next morning, the university confirmed Dalton had been on an independent study trip in April 2014. Destination: remote alpine research site. No coordinates listed. For Soto, it was enough to push for a formal interview. But before they could serve the papers, something else landed on the desk. A message from the forum admin, an archived private message sent from Granite Path to another user. Time-stamped April 22nd, 2014. The subject line was blank. The body read, "If the lake ever drops, they'll know." The lake was low, record low. A dry winter, then a hotter than usual summer. The shoreline had receded almost 20 feet, exposing mudflats pocked with hoofprints from deer and elk. That's when the fisherman saw it. A shape, long and narrow, tangled in reeds just offshore. He thought it was a log. Then he saw the strap buckle. By the time the deputies arrived, the sun was dropping behind the ridge. The light caught the object in a way that made the color seem brighter than it should have been after 8 years in water. Yellow. Not tarp yellow, not leaf yellow. Sleeping bag yellow. They worked it free slowly, the mud releasing it in heavy sucking sounds. A heron lifted off nearby, its wings loud in the still air. On the bank, Ravi stood very still, hands loose at his sides. No camera, no notes, just watching. The bag's fabric was stiff, coated with a layer of fine silt, but the straps were still buckled. The pull tabs, one missing, were caked but intact. They laid it flat on a clean tarp. When they unzipped it, the smell came first, a deep, stagnant odor of long-sealed water and organic decay. Inside, sediment, pine needles, 2 small stones, and at the very bottom, pressed into the lining, a patch of dark fabric with a frayed seam. North Point jacket lining. They photographed it in place, then bagged it. Chain of custody logged, evidence tagged. Back at the station, the lab team confirmed it. Same model as the jacket linked to the zipper pull, same production run. Fibers matched the sample taken from the cabin map tacks. The sleeping bag itself had damage near the foot, a long tear, edges smooth as if cut by a blade rather than frayed by wear. The lead tech, looking up from the table, said, "This wasn't dropped, it was placed." The message from Granite Path played in Soto's head. If the lake ever drops, they'll know. She ran the timeline again. Dalton's research trip, the weather patterns that year, the position of the lake relative to the unofficial trailhead marked on the cabin map. Every variable pulled the point tighter. Dalton had access. Dalton had knowledge. Dalton had the window, but no direct witness, no body. They went to Montana with a search warrant. Dalton's P.O. box was empty. The postmaster hadn't seen him in over a year. Neighbors at his last listed address said he kept to himself, worked odd seasonal jobs, left suddenly one fall, and never came back. One neighbor remembered something else, a yellow tarp in the back of his truck. Back in the evidence locker, the original tarp found by Dale Benton sat on a high shelf. Under the fluorescence, its faded color looked almost the same as the sleeping bags after 8 years underwater. Almost. Ravi visited the lake the next morning. He walked to the edge where the bag had been pulled from the reeds, kneeled down, pressed his palm flat against the damp earth. It was cool to the touch. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine her here, not in the moment she vanished, but earlier, the way she had been in the last photo, smiling, the yellow bag rolled tight under one arm. The ripples on the lake surface reflected a fractured sky. Somewhere under that water, there were still things that hadn't surfaced. Soto called him that night. No arrest yet. No confirmed location for Dalton. Just one new lead. The forum account Granite Path had logged in once from a public library computer in Wyoming. 3 weeks ago. Ravi didn't ask what the post said. He already knew. Something short, something meant to be found later. The kind of thing you'd write if you were still out there. Watching. Thanks for watching this story. Let us know your opinions about this story in the comment section. See you soon in the next story.